Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Michelle, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Thank you. Good morning.
I'm so delighted to be talking with you today. You are an HR professional, have your own business in HR, and we will get to all that because I know a lot of HR questions our listeners have about when we think about healthy work environments and how to have them and what happens when things are going wrong. But before we get to that, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Oh, if we go really far back. I my very first job was actually at McDonald's when I think I was about 14 or 15 years old. A family friend was opening a franchise and asked for some help with just opening. So I literally had to like peel the stickers off, and I was one of the since I was small, I was able to like build the play place and like get into the play place and stuff like that. So I was a little bit of the labor for that. And then I was offered a job once they actually opened to like work in the restaurant, kind of after school and stuff like that. So I had an official job doing that. And then I didn't work again until I got into college. And then I worked at J.C. Penney's, and that was probably the first official job that that I did as like I considered my first like real big person job.
Right, that wasn't gotten from a family friend.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Quite a few people I talk to, one of their first jobs is fast food, right? That's just a
hmm
very normal. Um, and people I've talked to have had all these different sorts of experiences. And I wonder how different your experience is working at this franchise, McDonald's franchise, when you had this in because the owners were known to you instead of just being
hmm
hired. Um, I mean,
Yeah, I
it's hard to
probably
compare that. Yeah.
Yeah, it was probably a little bit of favoritism. There was another time where I worked in the restaurant industry. I was a really bad restaurant person. I remember getting in trouble at McDonald's because I would always forget. It was different buttons to upsize, and I don't know why. It was an older system. We're talking many, many, many years ago. Um, I'll actually date it. It was in the 90s, and it was where when you did an up the size up and everything. It was a different button for the drink and the fries. And when
Mhm.
I was working in the to go line, you take the order and then the person that actually fills the order is a different person. And so they would come to me and it would happen more than once and they'd be really upset that they got an upsized drink but not an upsized fry or something. And they'd be like, why didn't I get a bigger fry? And I'd be like, I don't know. It's like whatever they told me I put in the system. And so, yeah, I was really bad at, attention to detail. I was taken off to goes because of things like that. Um, and I burned myself on the fry thing. I had like a really bad burn across my arm. I did probably a few things that, especially being a teenager, probably would have ended up making me not a good fit to stay for as long as I was there. But that's probably the only thing. It was like having a family friend, and then I think eventually either I was encouraged to stop going by my parents. Eventually, like I quit, but I'm pretty sure the idea was put in my head to kind of like, can you not show up anymore because you really suck at this?
That is so funny. It's interesting, like how we show up to work as young people and then how we grow and develop. And so the self-assessment of not paying attention to those kind of details. Like, so I'm a philosopher by trade, and so I'm a big picture person, and it's multidyslexic. So paying attention to the details is difficult and laborious. But I know
hmm
how important it is, right? So I have to try extra hard to do that. Was that just sort of like a one-off, or is that sort of something that you have found in yourself?
No, I have a lot of limitations which is really great as a business owner. I get to do things that set me up for success, and I rely on other people that are better than me. And
Mhm.
I often want to work with people that are better and smarter and than I am. And I am also not punctual at all. I have never been punctual. There was a job that I was at. It was an insurance company. It was a car insurance company, and I was an auto theft investigator. but it was a desk job and I was supposed to be there between, I think my schedule was 7:30 to 4:30. I kind of was able to make what I wanted, but I was like designed to be there from whatever time that was. If I wanted it to be 8 to 5 or whatever, and I chose 7:30 to 4:30, but I had like a 6 minute window to clock in on time. I literally lived 1 mile from, I could actually walk home when the weather was nice. If I was like sharing the car with my now husband, then boyfriend and fiance. And I don't remember the exact number that I was late, but by the time they said something to me, it was like 100 and something, well over 100 something, almost, 200 times late in a year. Like it was essentially being late every other day to every day for almost a year. And they finally said something to me, but I was the only one that did my job. I was the only investigator. And then they finally brought in a second investigator and they were like, just stop being late. Like, why can't you be here on time? And I would clock in like at the 7 minute mark or the 8 minute mark. It would be 1 minute after the grace period. And I'd be like, I don't know. I just want to be here. I don't know. I would just, by the time I park and I walk in, and if I had the ability to clock in from my phone in the parking lot, I would have been fine. But getting to my desk and sitting down and waiting for the computer to turn on, I was just horrible at being punctual. And that continued to follow me forever. I am notoriously a few minutes late. I try to be very respectful of other people's time. So if I am in a meeting or if I am taking up especially my team members or my executive team and things like that. If I'm 1 or 2 minutes late, I try to kind of keep it to that. I've learned that being late is obviously wasting time. I'm very aware of that. So that's where I've kind of tried to change things. Also, if I get lost in time, I feel like that's kind of also a ADHD autistic thing because I'm autistic. But instead of worrying about that, I'll join a meeting like 15 minutes early and just sit there and wait and then I'll get lost in my work and let that happen. And then someone will just join the meeting whenever they join. So I've done things to try to make up for my shortcomings. But it's some of those things where it just is, I just don't have the attention to detail. If I need something proofread, I would ask a team member to do it I've been a manager and a leader for a long time. So I would have team people underneath me that I could delegate something to and have them check my work before something goes out. When I was working on my doctorate, and obviously I have a whole publication, I was, working with an editor and things like that too. So there was quite a bit of work that went into editing that. So I've had to do things that are very important in attention to detail, but I definitely just outsource and hire people or rely on people for that.
Oh my word. It's just breathtaking, your self awareness and I love your workaround. I've got workarounds too. And I love how just matter of fact, these are sorts of things that I don't, are not in my wheelhouse. And so I compensate by having other people, by farming it out, by making it happen. So that everything is running smoothly. I just think that's so wonderful because I think quite a few people as professionals, we're aware that we should be aware that we don't do everything well. We should understand what we
Mhm.
do well and really be able to spend our time on that. And because other people do these other things well, right? We need diversity of thought, ability, experience, diversity in so many different ways. It's just golden.
Mhm.
So to know this about yourself and then to build the work around
Mhm.
so that you are able to shine and do the things that you do and execute that well. I just think that's lovely. It's such a model. I think so many people aspire to that.
Yeah, well, with having so much higher education in psychology, all of my higher level education is in psychology. So like 12 years, 14 years of nothing but higher education in psychology. It's kind of something you can't study without like really taking a hard look internally, and becoming self-actualized. And that was probably something else with the doctorate because it's literally writing a paper for 5 years. I mean, two years was coursework, and then 3.5 years was the paper.
Mhm.
And having in the doctoral program, you don't have deadlines. You just do the work and you do your own pace and you kind of have to set your own deadlines. And that's probably something else with procrastination that I noticed about myself that I knew I had it in me to finish and I knew I would always get it done. There was definitely times where, because I built my business at the same time. So I kind of grew to a seven-figure business within 3 years at the same time that I was getting my doctorate. And so it was working full-time days and working on the program full-time at night and weekends and whenever I would fit it in. And so that was probably another like deficiency, I guess, that I have is procrastination. Especially, I'm one of those people that if I've never done it before or I don't exactly know how to do it, and there's not a really good way to learn how to do it, especially with something like a dissertation, because it's a unique research. The whole point is to put out new information and do something that is, I would say like there is a framework and there is structure, but everything else about that is your own and it's required to be unique. And so I had, a cohort, and I had some people to lean against and kind of talk over with some of those issues. But ultimately, it still fell on me to get everything done and to analyze my own data and kind of get through it. And it was something new and different every day. And so it's so funny to me when people are in jobs where it's something new and different all the time and they love it and they love something to be unique and the different environments that they enjoy. And so I think that, and to me, that would be so frazzling. So that's also something I think is great when people are very aware, or at least if there's assessments or something out there where people are, they try to align the right job with the right person. If someone's out there job hunting and they're like, oh, I took an assessment and they told me I wasn't a good fit for the job, it's probably true. Like, try not to be too offended because, the assessments are out there to create a job match for a specific type of person. So if it's, the type of job that is mundane and repeatable and you have a lot of the same work and you're the type of person that wants something unique and challenging, it's where that, it's not going to be a good fit versus someone who wants to know what to expect and it is repeatable, then you should have someone in that role. So those are some of the things that I have found myself. If it's something is hard or challenging or something I have to sit down and focus on, really, spend a lot of time on to absorb new information, I will be the type to put it off.
Yeah.
And it will cause delays. And if it's my own project, great. If I'm the only one it impacts, then so be it. My project will get done when it's done. Otherwise, I'm like, I'm not good at just chunking away at something in small pieces. Like if it's like, oh well, I'll work on it an hour a day every day. I wish I could do that because I would love to learn like a new language and I would love to have new skills that you could chip away at like that. But if I can sit down and work on something and get lost in something for hours, I would prefer to do it that way. So I think that's a good thing when you can identify things about yourself with your work environment or your hobbies and things like that are important and how you want to show up for yourself and for your work is really important. It's great to have a job that you enjoy in that capacity. Obviously, jobs you enjoy is like the output of work you do, but I think the environment is really important.
Absolutely. And I love that idea of not being offended because, this job, this assessment is saying it's not good for me. Well, then if you were to take it, you're not going to be as happy and you are making it so that the next thing, the next opportunity you don't see because you are stuck in this position where it's change all the time and you crave stability or vice versa or whatever it might be.
Hmm.
I hear you with the uh, everything having to be self-motivated and self-directed on your own timelines. I'm writing a book right now and I'm in this laborious editing process. That's like for me the worst process because it's written and now I'm gotta go through it. And it's all on me, right? Nobody's breathing down my neck. I do it when I do it. And I want it done, right? So I have this goal, but it's like, oh, and I can't work on it for hours and hours because my mind turns to mush, right? So it's got to
Hmm.
be
Oh,
slow and
especially in
steady.
that kind of with editing or when it's something that is that part of the process and it's not, I would say that's not the fun part.
Right, me
That is
too.
the,
Yeah, that's right.
and
So
I feel like it's one of those things where there's certain things I think it was my master's program where I just got tired of reading my own writing
yeah.
and I would just write a paper and turn it in. And I actually got to a point where a professor was like, please just please reread it. Like this is awful. Like what were you trying to do here? And I was like, I honestly don't remember. I was at 2 o'clock in the morning. I have no idea what I was writing. And they were like, well, then don't expect me to grade your papers anymore. So I did get a little bit of a little, it's back of my hand for that one. So that one was, but I just writing so much with research papers for through my master's and through my doctorate program. That's actually, I commend you for writing a book. That's amazing and such um, a hard feat to at least get, especially to be where you're at. And would hopefully get to read it one day. I would love that. But yeah, with the writing part of it, obviously it took me years to do the dissertation, and I would love to take the research because it's very research based. It's a dissertation,
Right.
but I wanted to be able to rewrite it as something digestible and tangible for the actual workforce, and make it more of a relatable document. And I'm sure one day I will, and then take what I've learned and turn it into something that would make sense for the business world.
Yeah.
I've been asked to write like a chapter in a textbook and things like that. So there's been some technical writing that I've done, but yeah, that's kind of been I haven't written for fun. So
So will you tell us what you majored in college and then how that led you to starting your own business?
yeah, so I majored in psychology for undergrad and minored in marketing
Mm,
with I think at the time I really didn't have a large direction of what I was going to do. I thought I wanted to be a researcher, and I probably still will one day. And I knew that in psychology, to do anything with the field, you would need, higher education.
mhm,
But right out of undergrad, I worked. That's when I got the job at the insurance company, and I left the restaurant industry. And I started working in like all claims, and then ended up in auto theft and arson investigations, which was very fascinating. And knowing psychology was a great background for that field. But I ended up getting salary capped,
mhm,
and I wanted to be able to continue to, kind of essentially climb the corporate ladder is kind of what I was looking to do. And I decided to go back to school to get my master's degree and kind of figure out another field because I didn't want to stay in investigations. I didn't want to become a special investigator. Um, and I knew people that had been doing it at that point, 20, 30 years. That became like their lifelong career. And I was like realizing that's not what I wanted.
mhm,
And so while I was still at the insurance company, I went back to school for my master's. And initially, I started focusing my degree on human behavior research. And I thought I would get a job in behavioral research. And so that's where I started. And then I couldn't get a job in research because my background wasn't in academia, and I
mhm,
didn't know how to write a grant. I didn't know how to, essentially be a research assistant. I wasn't an analyst. So I realized that from a business perspective, if I looked into industrial organizational psychology, and that kind of is the research and best practices of human resources. So I decided to switch my focus, which I still had without being able to lose any credits that I had at that point, to IO psychology, and finished out my master's in IO psych. While I was in school, so like right in the middle, so I just finished my first year, I got my job as an HR coordinator, I believe was my title, at a large tech company. Technically, I got that job through a recruiting agency, but once I was approached by the recruiting agency, it turns out that my husband knew the owner of the subsidiary of that
mhm,
company, and I pretty much just name dropped and got the job. And so that's how I actually ended up with my very first job in HR, was knowing people at the company and knowing their head developer, knowing the owners, and I pretty much got the job on the spot. And when I finished my master's degree, I immediately got my SHRM certification in HR. So by the time I had been in HR for 1 year, I had my master's degree, my HR certification, and then I was kind of moving up the ladder. By the time I had been there for, I want to say, 2 years, I was at, it was like in my early 30s, and I was promoted to head of HR.
mhm,
And at that time, the company had about 500 employees. And I replaced myself and had a team of five, and then continued to climb the corporate ladder. By the time I left, that company had 850 employees across 10 states and 4 countries. And I
mhm,
ran HR for all of it. That company sold to private equity. I left and went to a smaller residential construction company that only had 100 people in one state. And that is when I was like, oh, that is so much easier than what I was just doing. And I can do that in my sleep. And I can manage everything I need to manage there as a department of one. And I was able to do that, work a regular job. The company pretty much, if I worked past 4:30, I was the one locking the doors. It was a really great environment. They really enjoyed work-life balance. It wasn't about working to the bone anymore. It was about building homes for the community. And so they really valued homes and the home life and the community. So that was a really great reset of not having to work so hard versus the tech company. I would arrive in the dark. I'd go home in the dark. I don't even remember. I couldn't even tell you what I did all day. I was just always in meetings and always answering emails. And it was just a huge, huge like oversight of everything. And so because of that, I had the mental space to start my doctorate. And then once I was in my second year of my doctorate, I didn't want to have to balance a corporate job with my degree. So I was like, I'll become an independent contractor.
Mhm.
And that way I can have the flexibility of doing the HR as a consultant with the ability to kind of do my work with my schooling. I learned essentially how to use my network. I started going to networking events. I started going to like Chamber of Commerce events and communicating with people I knew on LinkedIn, reaching out to just different business owners, and kind of I was already on the board of directors for HR Tampa, and the which is local here to Tampa, and started going to the obviously conferences and things like that, and landed my first client. So I had worked out an exit strategy with the company that I was with, so they knew I was leaving. I didn't surprise anybody. We actually had a 3-month exit strategy and worked out a plan for me to transition my position to a new person, and then started with my new client at the end of those 90 days. So it was a very nice transition. Everyone was very transparent about everything, and it was a really nice way to leave corporate and start as a consultant. And then I ended up getting 8 clients in the first 3 months and hired 2 people rather than turn down the work. And so I didn't mean to start a firm, but I very quickly just kind of transitioned into supporting small businesses. And now we have like 40 team members and 85 clients, and I've been in business for 5.5 years. So
Mhm.
I would say I grew very quickly, but I grew very steadily without
Mhm.
having to take in, I didn't take in funding or anything. Everything was homegrown, and we kind of just grew the team as we had income from clients. And so we would bring on clients and then bring on team members and kind of redelegate work around and things like that. So it's been a lot of lessons learned when it comes to building something like that versus,
Mhm.
hiring people and having capital.
Mhm.
So we kind of had to work within our own working capital, but that's kind of how long story on how I got from, kind of being able to go through my entire career path to owning a business. And it was really funny when I first started, I thought that it would be a passive income if I had employees and they could do the work and I could just collect and kind of do my schooling and have this passive income. That was the most naive thought I think I have ever had. Owning a business and running a business and caring about it and having passion for it is not passive at all.
No, no, it's 24/7.
Yeah, it went from like a nice, like corporate, slow environment. Everything was great. They had a wonderful environment. It was actually really great. I was surprised with a construction company that it was a wonderful culture. The leadership team really cared. It was everyone at the company when I would do like surveys and stuff. The meaning of the community was a big part of it,
Mhm.
and so that was something that I didn't expect from that company or even that industry, which was really great, obviously. And then giving that up to having to work 24/7 and having to like not have days off. I remember taking one day off a couple months ago. And it was my very first time putting up an out of office in 5 years.
Oh my goodness.
Because now I have a leadership team and I reached out to everybody. I was so nervous and I was like, can I put up my out of office and put all these directions? So if anyone has anything that says they go to you guys, is everyone okay with it? And I had it up for one day on a Friday. And I think that's the only time I've ever taken time off.
Oh my goodness. Well, congratulations. I mean, what a wonderful success story. And so I want to ask you this, since I'm very interested in conflict
Mhm.
and how we have healthy work environments. So when you think about your younger self, uh, and as you have gone up the career ladder to where you are now, how did you deal with conflict when you were younger in the workforce versus how you deal with it now?
Oh gosh, when I was younger, I mean, which is crazy because I'm also pretty introverted. I had to train myself to be a little obviously more extroverted. It was part of climbing the corporate ladder. I had to be able to speak in public. I had to be able to, especially for the corporate environment, speaking for like, new benefits and announcements and all that kind of stuff. So when I was younger, I was not outspoken, would not say anything. I probably, if I had a conflict with someone, I would not say anything to anyone. I probably, especially like, for example, I would just avoid a person. I do recall that, if someone hurt my feelings or if I felt upset about something, I would, just not say anything.
Mhm.
Um, if there were people that I didn't like working with, I there was one at one point on a team, it's kind of like where it's a team, but there's one person that just doesn't contribute. And everyone has to do all the work with the rest of the team.
Right.
We definitely had that, and so it's those are the types where it's like even confronting them was really difficult. As I got older and became the leader, and then people would take their complaints to me, or I had to deal with conflict within my team. That was definitely a lot of growth and change, and having to learn communication skills. I had to learn a lot of, obviously conflict resolution skills. There was a lot that I had to learn, and a lot of that came from, taking training and reading books and wanting to grow in that space so that I could continue to grow my career. And I'm still, I would say, something that I'm not very good at being overly direct to be like if I'm going to talk about a problem behind behind someone's back, but like to try to like talk through something. We
Right.
do have a coach on the team. This is
Mm.
actually a perfect example. Um, when I need behavioral change from the team, I don't directly do that myself. I have a leadership coach that she works with our clients. She also works with everybody on the team. So if
Mm.
I am needing to make sure someone is, growing in a right direction, gaining the skills that they need, and I know that it's not something that I have the skill set to give them, but I need to make sure they get there. I will tell that to the coach and then make sure her coaching sessions go in that direction.
Mm.
And I I would avoid telling that person outright directly, this is the behavioral change I'm looking for. I kind of go around and do it through the coach. So unfortunately, maybe it's also just being able to outsource some of my own shortcomings still, but there are some things that, as the HR leader, that I've done in my career where I had to be the person to manage the conflict,
Mhm.
and I would have to kind of just put on a hat and do that for those conversations and try to be the person in the room for that. But it also made me, there's things that I would steer away from. Like I did not become a professional mitigator kind of thing. Like there's people that, if we needed to bring in our corporate lawyer or if we needed someone else to be in the room as a witness, things like that. I was much easier working on investigations where it's individual and you kind of have individual one-on-ones to get statements and things like that. That I could do, and I could take that from my world of investigating. But to do conflict management, it is very difficult. Those are hard.
Mhm.
Keeping people's emotions in check, helping people stay regulated through difficult times is definitely very hard, especially kind of when you're the type of person that mirrors other people,
Mhm.
and you kind of end up, if they get really elevated, and obviously your heart starts pounding, and you kind of have to figure out how to keep yourself calm so they stay calm. It is very much of a conscious effort to do conflict management, and that
Yeah.
has just something I had to learn over the years.
Absolutely. I mean, what I love about so much of what you've said is that is this idea of, what does it mean to be a professional? And so some people just say, well, I'm conflict adverse, and so I'm not going to do anything about it. Well, if you think about who is it that you want to be and how do you want to be treated and where do you want to go? Part of being a professional is realizing I'm going to have to, right? I'm going to have to
Hmm.
speak up for myself. I'm going to need to sometimes have these difficult conversations. But what I also absolutely love, and I've had, 170 podcasts. I've never heard anybody talk about having a leadership coach on staff, on the leadership staff, who can, first of all, that people have access to so that they can be better tomorrow than they are today, right? But then also that you can have this directed work, but it also takes you noticing it and saying something about it, right? And so there are a variety of different workarounds for our given personalities, what our strengths and our weaknesses are. But seeing it, knowing that it needs to happen and making sure that it happens. The leader doesn't have to do everything, but the leader needs to make sure it is all getting done, right?
Hmm.
And so I think that's a really imaginative way to um, to deal with conflict management as long
Hmm.
as it's getting done. And of course, doing the
Hmm.
things that you need to do.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, that's pretty inventive. I like that very much.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice because she works with our clients, so that kind of covers the cost of her that way. And then, we essentially, just don't make any money off that because she turns around and just does all the time internal for us.
Mhm.
And so that's she kind of just pays for herself essentially, which is really great. And like there was a recent situation where which happens often, not often, it does happen with our clients where if it's a situation where someone is not performing, like they're a great performer for many, many situations and it just may not work in one situation. And so we transition out who is working with the client. And so we usually need to do that. I would say it's once every quarter, maybe once or twice a year kind of
Mhm.
thing. And because we don't, it's not necessarily that our clients get to interview who they work with, and obviously there's an interview process for a reason. So when we assign a team member to work with a client, sometimes we get it wrong when we're kind of matching them up, and we just have to
Sure.
make a transition. And so the leader on the department that needed to be a part of the facilitation for that was, asking, how do I make sure that we frame this correctly? Everyone, realizes this is a positive change and we need to do things before things get, are falling through the cracks and,
Mhm.
she's overworked and we need her focused on another client and things like that. And honestly, I was like, go to the coach. I wish I had answers for you. I wish I could tell you the best way to problem solve this and how to frame it. And I was like, but to be honest, go to the coach. And she
Mhm.
did. And she got great advice and, basically kind of was able to take a step back, look at it from the client's perspective and be able to manage it. And then worked out very beautifully with the communication with everybody. And it was a positive transition because, the people that, needed to be involved were obviously very supportive of the whole situation and it worked out really well. And I didn't have the answers. And I was like, but, having that resource was amazing for everyone involved. And so what's also nice is the coach that we have works with everybody in the company.
Mhm.
And so if anyone has anything like negative, they have somewhere to vent and they
Yeah.
have someone to go to that's not their manager or even a coworker. And so we kind of also have a good way to manage that water cooler talk.
Mhm. Right.
And so, if someone, it's like we definitely want people to be able to voice their concerns, vent when they need to, and know that, we are here to support them. That was something that I wanted that for my company that I saw that I didn't like in corporate environment or in many situations is that there's the way that HR is treated can be a very thankless job. A lot of times
Mhm.
companies don't understand what HR does all the time.
Mhm.
And they could be like, I don't know, our HR person's there, they work all day and I don't know what they do. So yeah, we hear that often. And I didn't want that to, since I get to build an HR company, I wanted everyone in the company to feel valued, even if the work that they do and our clients are paying for us. So they have to invest very differently in HR. So I try to work with clients that understand that and value HR and value our services versus think of us as a necessary evil. And, we're not as, dismissed as some companies can dismiss their HR. But it was something that was really important to me for internal to build a culture and environment where they had the ability to grow their careers and, make sure that they had a place that, they felt like they could be themselves
Mhm.
and be heard and things like that too. And that way when the coach does come back with advice, she will not share who shared things with her and
Mhm.
she'll also aggregate a lot of information so it could be multiple people. So
Mhm.
when she comes up with ideas for improvement, it comes from a space where, people's identities are kind of kept secret as well.
I love that. It's not the same, of course, as an ombuds, but I'm a big proponent of the ombuds organization, organizational ombuds, where embedded in organizations, there's a person dedicated to help people move through conflict. So when
Mhm.
something happens, because I do lots of conflict coaching training, but I could train a bunch of people, but then in 6 months, 9 months, that's when the thing happens. And it's
Hmm.
to be able to have somebody to talk through, not to solve it for them, but to be there, to be able to vent in this positive way, to figure out what am I going to do next, so that that person is empowered to do that next thing is so valuable when people, and obviously when they invest in their people so that they can do good work. And I really appreciate what you're talking about because so many organizations are infested with gossip, right?
Hmm.
Gossip is going to happen. Everything's in the process of falling apart. Gossip is a sign that things are falling apart. It's going to happen if you don't have a plan in place and say, we're just not doing that here. We're doing something else, right? We're going to have a real space to be able to talk through problems so that we can move forward, so that we can have a healthy work environment.
Hmm.
So I was wondering, I want to talk about what HR does. I mean, I think everybody listening to this podcast as well, Mary, I know what HR does, but maybe not. And when somebody is having a conflict, either they're in a conflict with their boss or another employee, and it raises to the level of needing to get a third party like HR involved. Um, and maybe an investigation is going to go on. Can you tell us in general, what is the role of HR in relation to what the organization expects and what HR is doing for the organization, and then also
Hmm.
in respect to the individual and what HR is doing for the individual?
And it's really good that you point out that it's a multifaceted role and a multifaceted outcome. And so everything that HR touches has a law around it. So it's really important that a good HR person is that is going to be doing investigations. They're there to protect all parties, protect the company and protect the employee because everyone has legal rights, both the company and the employee. And so there's a lot of like good like best practices on how to make sure that a certain conflict resolution and investigations are handled so that if it does get to the point of, let's say, if there's going to be a lawsuit or some kind of legal action, or you're trying to keep it from getting that far, everything that happens when it comes to certain, especially when it comes to a lawsuit, certain things can become discoverable. And so when it comes to the investigation side, HR kind of has to put on a very different hat when it's about protecting the company and protecting the employee and thinking so far in the future of what happens when information that we're collecting becomes discoverable. And so there's a lot of notes, a lot of documentation. Everything is considered dates and times and full names. And when when if an investigation ends up down a rabbit hole, oftentimes there'll be the original person that filed the complaint and their statement, and the person or persons that are named, and then there's the one thing that we often get asked is, can you keep it confidential? And yes, to an extent, but honestly, the answer is no. The people that are named have to be included. And while we can ask everyone to, not disclose any information outside of the room. Again, there's only so much you can do, but the ultimate findings and what happens and things like that is kind of like the decisions that are made, and all of that is essentially confidential. But it's not like if you make a complaint, we have to do something about it
Mhm.
because it falls on the company to, there's something that you should have known is a legal concept that if something was made and we did nothing about, if the complaint was made and we did nothing about it, then that's a problem, and it kind of falls into the management should have known there was a process and we have to follow it. So you can't just say I have a problem but keep it confidential. It's not going to happen. We have to be able to do something about it and protect the company and protect the people involved. And then every time we talk to a person, we're going to ask them to name anyone else that needs to be discussed, or anyone else that might have been a witness, or anyone else that might be involved. And then they may name names. And then we go talk to them and they may name names. So then it just goes down, and we just have this huge long list of people that we're talking to. And one thing that can be really important is a lot of times we are documenting our own notes, and HR people are the people, and there's biases. And so we try to be, obviously professional as possible and unbiased, but, just our own self biases are, can creep in. So it's really important that people, when they make statements, they also put their own statements in writing so that they are clearly understood and not misinterpreted in any way. If you're the person that is starting to have the issues, make a diary. Things that are important are full dates, names, and obviously like your interpretation of what happened. Um, and so keeping your own notes is really important. Emails are extremely important because emails are time stamped. And so if you write an email to your manager, putting something in writing is important and kind of following up. So if someone has a verbal conversation with you, a lot of times what will happen in HR is we'll give you the information of our statement and you can add to it or you can submit your statement in writing. And so we kind of make sure the work is checked and edited and things like that, and being able to use all of that essentially as evidence in the case. And then typically our responsibility is to make, depending on the authority of HR in the company, we make the recommendation of what's going to happen. And there's been times where we've had to bring in lawyers to kind of discuss what laws are being involved and what kind of room do we have to play in with those laws and, who violated what and how do we kind of mitigate things. And it could be so much as, typically you go back to the original person that made the complaint and kind of give them the opportunity to kind of let them know what's happened and how things have gone down. I did have one issue once, which I thought was interesting. They made a complaint and it was never corroborated. No one they were like they had witnesses. They're like, this manager is singling me out and they're harassing me. And no one else felt that way. And they were like, and we saw the emails they were saying that they thought were targeting to them, and they were very normal emails. The manager had nothing wrong against this person. Their entire team, every single person they mentioned, didn't, agree with this person. So we basically had to go back and say, you've kind of made a false claim. And so there's certain things that was probably the one time in my whole career where no matter how much digging we did, no matter how much we never found anything to support their claim. And I've never had that happen again. But we basically said, you can choose to be moved under a different manager. And he was like, why am I the one getting in trouble if I, I was like, because we can't, there's nothing else for you. And it was like, we also offered a severance where like, you can choose to leave if you would like, you can choose to keep your job, you can choose to stay where you are and have no changes because we can't change something that isn't there, or you can choose to move to a different department under a different manager. And he chose to quit. But those are kind of things where it's like most of the time the investigation actually shows there was real something there, and we have to make a real change to something in the organization. But it's our part to protect the employee, protect the company, and protect everyone's interest, because there's going to be laws somewhere that's going to, something that we have to make sure we're following across the board. Whether it could be something local, it could be something federal, it could be, especially if it's something about a discrimination that we may find. I had one where it started with someone complaining about getting an inappropriate meme from their manager that it was a joke. And they just said, we're like, I get that it's a joke. I just think it's inappropriate. And I was like, okay, I'll talk to the manager. And I thought he was a great guy. I didn't think, I was like, hey, I'll just have this conversation, be like, just, try to keep people in mind. Everyone has different perspectives. Don't do things like that. And it turns out that it wasn't just the meme. We ended up firing the manager. But the investigation went so far to find out that he was treating people in a discriminatory way. He would make the women work harder and longer hours than the men. He was, often sending things that were inappropriate to multiple different types of races, genders. Like he was basically like making everyone feel uncomfortable for multiple different reasons. And when we ended up kind of just peeling back the layers, and it was just so often and so frequent and so egregious that we had to let the manager go. And of course, the original person that made the complaint about the meme was like, I didn't mean to get him fired. And I was like, it's not you. Like,
Right.
it's not your complaint that did that at all.
Right.
You kind of opened a can of worms, but the worms were there to be found. So I feel like, there's certain times when people are like, I didn't mean for this to be the outcome. I just wanted to be heard. And it's like, don't take that personally. Like, it's not your decision of what ultimately needs to happen, but it's there to protect the interest. If there wasn't a reason to do it, it wouldn't have happened. But it does mean that your complaint was very valid. And it don't take it personally when those end up being the outcome because it's those, really doesn't fall on you, but it does mean that, companies can and should take complaints seriously. And you really should be, standing up for yourself. Like you said, it's people will treat you how you allow them to treat you.
Mhm.
And that was something that I also had to learn that you have to teach people how to treat you and standing up for yourself and standing up for what you're willing to stand for is important.
Yeah. I really appreciate you started with this expectation of privacy because when somebody has had something happen to them, their pain is real and their offense or the injustice or whatever it is they've suffered, it can feel like I'm telling you this in confidence because it is so personal. But I think it's so very important for people to understand what HR is doing, right? So some people say, oh, HR doesn't care about the individuals or that HR is just there to serve the individuals. And I think you've done a wonderful job of articulating why it's not either, it's both, right? Because if HR is not there to protect the company will go away and nobody will have a job, right? Because of all these violations of law, right? They'll just be taken under by lawsuits or whatever. Um, but if HR is just like this iron fist who is just bashing people, then there won't be people to do the work, right? It's so and so HR so much is in the middle, in the fray of the wonderful things, right? People coming on and the wonderful events that are happening in people's life, and then also the tragedy, right? People want leave for the good things,
Hmm.
the awful things, coming in, going out, retiring, being, let go. And so to really, I think, as an employee and the employer to really have a clear understanding of what HR is doing and is for. And I think if you don't know, ask, right? If you want this to be private, you need to know who you're disclosing this to.
Hmm.
And then I love what you said. Once you've said it, it is out of your hands because you're not hiring or firing people as just an employee, right? It is out, and if the worms are there to be be found, right, a good investigation is going to find them. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that you said that, it's good to know. I think people should know their rights. I really wish high school taught like basic employment law, because I feel like people need to know their rights as an employee.
Mhm.
And when I was early in my HR career, I was telling someone their rights, and I actually got in trouble for that because it meant that the company had to accommodate them. And they were like, if they didn't know about that accommodation or to ask for it, we wouldn't have to do this. And I'm like, that is the horrible way to look at it.
Right.
And I'm like, they need to know that they have the right to ask for an accommodation. And I didn't, it's like we need a doctor's note. We have to prove that it's a valid,
Right.
accommodation request, but they need to know that they can ask for those things. And like even recently talking with one of my nieces, and she's in her early 20s, she has a physical disability and she can't stand all the time. And I asked her, and so she does have the ability to sit for part of her job and stand for part of her job. She has the ability to do that. And she does have to sometimes take some time off, and not often. She's a very, very hard worker, despite her, or maybe in spite of her disability. But I asked her, does HR know that, and have you documented with them your disability, which it's a very clear disability, it's physical, but it's like, do they have that on file? And then that way, if you need intermittent FMLA, you can chip away at time off that you need, and you can just document with them, so then that way you can take care of yourself and you can go to doctor's appointments and things like that that you may need. And she said no, and she'd been there a few years.
Mm-hmm.
So and it's also, that's kind of a disservice from HR not approaching her to educate her on, and that way the company can protect themselves, because if she's injured on the job or ends up in a workers' comp claim because something happens, they should have done something to help protect her and know what accommodation she needed. And I was like, and she's not asking for much. She's just, making sure that she doesn't get in trouble for sitting down for maybe a little longer than she should have, or stood, she just couldn't be standing, and or maybe one day she stood too long, and so the next day she needs to sit more or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the kinds of things where I think people, that's standing up for themselves. It goes back to, like you had mentioned, really just standing up for your own needs. But it also goes to, she was like, well, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to be targeted. And it's, a lot of employees will feel like they're just making noise if, what if they, would they rather hire somebody else than somebody who's looking at these accommodations, or maybe they may be passed over for a promotion or something like that. So I feel like there's those kinds of stigmas and issues. And that's why those laws exist and things like that. But it can also be there to make it the right workplace for you, and make sure that you have a safe work environment, both physically and mentally.
Yeah.
And so I feel like those are some of the things that, making sure that you even know that you have those rights,
Hmm.
and asking. And so I wish that there was a particular, just out there for people to be able to just have a place to find all their, rights, and look things up. And it's kind of like, if you don't know to ask, you don't
Right.
know what to do.
Right.
And I just wish there was something. I wish, and I feel like obviously our schooling is not designed for that, but I really do wish that in some point there was something that could have been done about it. But yeah, definitely ask, like you said, feel free to ask, feel free to know what your rights are. And if you don't think HR in your company is there for you, and they're there more for the corporate, or they're for employers or something like that, obviously the internet is a great place. Chat GPT and AI is getting great, because you can start asking very abstract questions.
Hmm.
And I feel like, as long as you ask it to provide internet resources,
Hmm.
and it now can kind of start scraping some real articles and information, and being able to read and research, and find someone that you trust to ask. But it's definitely, like you said, you have to stand up for yourself. You have to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can't believe this hour has gotten away from me. So as my last question for you, as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, but that they'll be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
Oh gosh. On such a broad scale, that's a very good question. And I hope that we do get there, because I feel like there's obviously the movement of like quiet quitting, because people
Mhm.
feel like they're not treated with respect, and
Yeah.
they're just there to collect a paycheck. They're gonna do the bare minimum to do their job. And, they aren't looking to go out of their way to give back to the company, or give to the company that they work for, which maybe from, not being in the right job, not being in the right environment that you want to work in and want to thrive in, versus, just collecting a paycheck. But I really feel like companies need to treat people like people, give them the space to do that. And, especially, like, for example, if someone wants time off, like you said, they want to be with their family, they want time off for a good reason or a bad reason. Companies can be like, oh, well, we are short staffed. We can't approve that. And it's like, it makes it hard for people to have work life balance and take vacations. So when companies don't treat people with respect and treat people like people, they get that back. So it kind of comes
Mhm.
down to treat people how you want to be treated. It
Mhm.
goes the same for corporate policies and structures. I feel like policies need to be there to withstand the test of time and treat people with dignity as well. So it comes from the tone and the space that these companies are made in, and why they exist. So holistically, I think that is a very hard place to get to say overall, like, to everyone to have that. I think it would be, people need to find the space that works best for them, so that they can do that. And, I think there's a lot of corporations out there that, when they start going after money and stop going after the reason that they were in business to begin with, those are really hard companies to work for. So finding, obviously, stop working at places like that, stand up for yourself, make complaints when you need to, um, and, make sure you're working in a space that you move on to that is in a good environment. And maybe it puts those bad businesses out of business,
Yeah.
because, you can't just continue to reinforce the bad behavior, and making sure that things are in the right space. So I feel like, from a if we all collectively do things, eventually the collective will thrive. But it's not always that simple. I feel like money talks too. So
Mhm.
it's a very hard question, but
It
it's
is, no, but I love your answer because I think I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about today is when you stand up for yourself, right? And in this professional way, but knowing who you are, knowing what it is you want, looking around instead of um, being passive. All right. The good
Mhm.
life is the active life. And passivity is, in this negative way, is when we're just not paying attention or we're just not able to look up. But being engaged and asking questions and being curious can help us realize if this is the place for me, are there other opportunities? Because if you're not curious, you won't know that something is wrong necessarily or know what to do about it. So
Mm-hmm.
I love that you've just said several times that, really there is a place for you out there and you want to be in a place where it's a good fit. And if all the talent is going to places where people are being treated well, if the other people places want to stay in business, then they're going to have to change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for being with me this hour. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope the listeners find it valuable.
Absolutely. People have so many questions about HR, so I appreciate it so much.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Take care. Michelle, thank you so much for being on Conflict Managed. This hour just flew by. I love your way of thinking about HR, which makes sense because you have a business and you've been in this field for a very long time. But really thinking about what HR is for and what it does and how it benefits our organizations and the individuals within it. And also really thinking about this investigation piece. If you find yourself wanting to file an HR complaint or in an investigation, I encourage you to find resources to educate yourself about what is happening, what ought to be happening. Is this a good process? And how can I protect myself when something illegal is happening at work or is something that I need to talk about so that you understand what is confidential and what is not. Mostly nothing is confidential when it comes to these sorts of things, but really understanding the process so that we aren't damaged. So many people get damaged in processes, and a lot of it is they have an unaligned expectation. So, Michelle, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for being with us on Conflict Managed this hour. Conflict Managed is produced by third-party workplace conflict restoration services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you're interested, you can watch this conversation with Michelle and I on YouTube. If you haven't had a chance to check out the book that is out, which is How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure. It's 80 tips of what not to do and continues a conversation about what to do instead to have healthy work environments. And I am very excited about this new book that is coming out. Probably, I'm thinking in November, but it's about winning the generation wars and making your age an asset at work. How do we future-proof our businesses so that we can deal with the reality of different generations and the good reality of different generations at work and win both individually and professionally? Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.